Hello, troublemakers. Welcome to this week's episode of Resolved Labor Podcast. I am your host, Lynn Fields, and this week we will be highlighting Min Matheson. Minnie Hindi LeRae was born January 19th, 1909 in Chicago, Illinois. Shout out to the Capricorns. Her parents were Max LeRae and Anna Kahn. Max and Anna were Jewish immigrants from Russia. She had a total of 7 siblings, and I believe she was the second oldest. One of the siblings actually passed away as a baby. Min's father, Max, was a cigar maker by trade, and he was born in Russia in 1877 and immigrated to America in the 1900s. He's described as 6'2" and had the build of an athlete. Now, I couldn't find anything on his parents, but we do know that 4 of his brothers were rabbis, and his entire family perished at the hands of the German army in World War II. Max, Anna, and Anna's father were activists who spoke out against the policies and actions of, dictators in that time. Now, Anna, Min's mom, actually served prison time, for giving speeches, out on the Russian streets. And her father, but she was eventually released. Her dad, he was sent to prison as well, but he was never released and served out his time in a Serbian slave labor camp. So you guys, Min has got, the rebellion in her blood. Like, her folks, they ain't no punks, so they about that life for real. So Max and Anna, they land in Ellis Island, New York, and they settle in Chicago because there was a Russian village where a lot of their comrades, they had settled. So Max immediately, became active in the labor movement. Her dad actually, he would serve the labor movement alongside of Samuel Gompers. And she says that they would have meetings at their house where, the workers and people would come over and they would commemorate the Haymarket Affair and the 8-hour workday. She said the immigrants would sing revolutionary songs. And, Min and her family, they would go to socialist picnics at Riverview Park. And every Sunday, she'd find, they'd be at the Chicago Federation of Labor Hall listening to speeches. Now, in 1919, U.S. Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer established a General Intelligence Division under the Department of Justice. This was formed to collect information on citizens engaged in, quote, un-American activities. And he appointed one J. Edgar Hoover to lead it. And there were raids done on the homes of suspected radicals in Chicago around this time. And Min's family, of course, they were targets of a lot of these, illegal searches and stuff. So they were just trying to find unionists, basically. And she says that she remembers, being a child, and late at night, these agents would come in the house and basically tear the house up looking for any kind of communist propaganda. So like I said, troublemakers, like Max, he became kind of like a well-known face in the labor movement in Chicago at this time. And he was actually head of the cigar makers union. And, but because, he started unionizing all these cigar factories, he eventually got fired from his job and he was blacklisted from, working anywhere else. So he became like a junk man, basically, just exactly what it means. He would collect junk and kind of sell it, for money for people, kind of like a pawn shop, right? And they actually had a junkmen's union in Chicago at this time. And so the story goes that, at one time, the junkmen were having a meeting one night, and some of Al Capone's goons, and actually some say Al Capone was there, some say he wasn't, but they worked for Al Capone. Now, Alphonse Gabriel Capone was an American gangster and businessman who reigned, over the crime syndicate in Chicago at this time. So they show up to him and his henchmen, they show up to this Junkman's Union meeting. And, they go on stage and they basically announce, hey, we are the mafia and you all will pay us for protections and everything that comes along with what the mob does. Surely you guys know that this is not how they said it. So he basically, they put it out there like, hey, we own y'all ass, right? And so they said that the story goes that Men's father, Max, got up on stage and he basically, started cussing their ass out in Yiddish because he didn't speak English, but he cussed their ass out in Yiddish and basically ended up throwing them out of the meeting. So y'all know this did not fare well with the mafia. And they say that a few days later, Max and one of his friends named Braverman, who was also a part of the movement, were standing outside chilling, and a car rolled by and basically did a drive-by. And Max was shot as well as Braverman. Braverman did not survive. However, it said that Max's brother Simon says that when they were loading him up onto the ambulance, that Max put his fist up in the air and he said, "I will live, I will live." And sure enough, he did. He actually lived. He survived the attack. But 3 days after he got out of the hospital, he was sitting in a car at a red light, and another car pulled up and pumped, 3 shots into his groin area. And y'all know Mad Max, like, once again, Max ended up living. When Min was in 9th grade, she dropped out of school and took a job as a secretary. When she was 19, she met a man named Bill Matheson, who was 12 years older than her. He was a fellow union activist. And, they were dating and they decided to just bump tradition. Like we just gonna go together real bad, And they ended up moving out east in 1932 to Paterson, New Jersey to join a textile workers strike. Min worked for several years in a garment factory in Manhattan with the hopes of landing a job with the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. That was her ultimate goal. Bill was already an educator for this union. In 1937, she achieved this goal and she got a job with the union. And as a matter of fact, her brother, Willie, who was 2 years older than her, 2 years younger than her. Her baby brother, Willie, was 2 years younger than her. And these two were, out of the 8 kids, these were the two that really, really, embraced the socialist ideals. And, he was so gung-ho about the union that he kind of chastised men for taking a salary from the union because he felt like every dime should go to the union. You should just have the bare necessities of life, right? Willie, I'm down. I'm hearing you right there. But this is the part where me and you just gonna part ways. In 1941, Min and Bill had their first daughter, Mary Ann, and then that's when she was like, okay, now that I done popped this baby out, it's time for me to be an honest woman. So her and Bill got married later that year. And then in 1943, they had their second daughter, Betty. In 1944, Min was assigned to Northeast Pennsylvania after the Ladies Garment Workers Union leadership, they told Bill and Min, look, we need y'all to go down here to Pennsylvania and, quote, clean up the mess down there. Now, the mess down there that they were talking about was the fact that garment factories in New York were closing shop and moving to Pennsylvania because the union had a very successful stronghold there. More factories were being unionized, the price of the wages were going up. And so they were like, you know what, y'all know what companies do. They move to these states where, the unions aren't as strong so that they could pay down wages. So, but we could solve this problem if all of us just fucking have one big union. But moving on, so they get down there and, like I said, these companies, they were allowed to pay these slave wages. So they get to this little town, down in Pennsylvania, and there was an anthracite coal mine in that region that, had basically dried up and it was in a decline. So the garment factories came there promising jobs to the wives and daughters of these ex-miners. And, so the men in this town, like, they didn't really work. Everybody, all the men would just hang out. And this is like reported that the men did not work. It was basically the women who would go and work at these garment factories, and they were the breadwinners of, in the family. And as a matter of fact, organized crime, they actually owned many of these factories. So I know, troublemakers, y'all are probably wondering, like, what does the mob want with these garment factories? Well, it's the mob, so you have to have a way to launder your money. And also, it's also reported that, a lot of the factories, they specifically targeted, young women, and not just any old young women. It was like young, attractive women, because there would also be like prostitution rings ran out of there. So they definitely wanted these, really young girls. Now, when men came on the scene, 6 of the factories in Pittstown, Pennsylvania were organized. And out of these 6 factories, they had a total of about 650 workers. The factories were dirty, they were dreary, of course, and cramped. We have these women that are just like leaned over these sewing machines. We've talked about these conditions before, troublemakers. And of course, we know the bosses would scream at the workers, and they were banned from going to the bathroom except during sanctioned breaks. The workers also earned their wages per piece, like per garment that they made. So this left them vulnerable to supervisors undercounting how many garments, were actually produced. Men was a very successful organizer. Like I said, Bill worked as the union's education outreach director for Eastern Pennsylvania. They led strikes, and they said that men was really, really fearless, that the women really respected her. They really loved to hear her speeches, and she showed like tireless, dedication. And she could often, she often left home to join picket lines before her daughters even woke up. And, they say that, she would get, the women, of course, were being called names. And there are reports that husbands and dads would like march down to the picket line and physically drag their daughters away sometimes. Now, another way that the mafia ran this town was, through the voting, right? And so they all knew, it was well known that the women would go down with their husbands or dads. They would sign the voting roll, and then they would, their dad or husband would cast the vote for them. Well, when men got wind of this, one of the first things she started working on this voter fraud that was going on. So what she did was she found one of the workers who agreed to, to go and vote. So, this was going to be her big campaign, right?
Hey, this is Lena from the Work Stoppage Podcast. We're a proud part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network, more than 200 labor radio and podcast shows across the country and around the world. The Labor Radio Podcast Network, where the people speak. Find us at laborradionetwork.org.
So the story goes that men recruited a woman named Carmela Saltino to, kind of buck this fraudulent voting system, right? So one day, Carmela, her husband, and men, they all go to the polls to vote. And there are these, quote, poll watchers there who work for the mob, and they are there to make sure that the men are casting the vote. And Carmela signed the roster, but she was like, give me the ballot because I'm not giving it to my husband. And it goes that, Carmela and men and the husband, like, they would not go into the voting booth until, Carmela got that ballot personally, not the husband, because they were going to buck this system. And, it was really important to men that the workers understood the power of that vote. So for hours, they sat there arguing, and eventually, Carmela did get a chance to cast her honest vote. Now, the person that ran the mafia in this town at the time, his name was Russell Buffalino. So Rosario Alfredo Buffalino, aka Russell Buffalino, was born October 29th, 1903 in Sicily. And he was the head of the crime syndicate in Pittstown at this time. There's actually reports that, he often, like the United States government, they often tried to deport him because of his criminal activities. However, the Italian government refused to take him back. So, like, he's y'all problem now is basically what the Italians told America. So basically, Russell and men, it was reported that they always used to have these little like face-offs in the streets. Like there was one time on a picket line where, they say that, someone yelled out over at the picketers. They yelled out, "Hey men, why don't you have your man come down here, and see how long he lasts on that picket line." And they say that Men, who was like, y'all got to remember, Men is like 5'2", okay? She marched over there and they said that she walked right up to Russell Buffalino. Mind you, he's not the one that said it, but she was trying to make a point. She basically looked at, Buffalino and she said, "I don't need my husband to come down here, Bill, because I'm twice the amount of man that you are." And apparently this really amused, the people that were standing around. But obviously, it did not amuse Russell because like Men's house was, bombed with red paint bombs later that night. And, it's reported, Men says that, their neighbors, they just wanted them to get the hell out because they drew so much attention. Her family just drew so much attention to themselves, dealing with the strikes and dealing with the union. So y'all know, Men, she didn't scare easily when it came to the mob because remember, her family, she watched her father, face them down before. And her family had already, faced significant violence at the hands of the mafia. So she didn't scare easily. However, Men's brother Willie, who was, like I told you guys, he ended up being a union activist as well for the International Ladies Garment Workers Union too. And he was out in New York. And he was a presser at the garment factory, which, when the garments would come off the line, he would press them so that they could be ready to go into the stores. And he was making about $100 a week. But when the union came a-calling, he actually took a 65% pay cut, to become an organizer for them because he strongly believed in this cause. And, Willie was having a lot of great success. But on May 9th, 1949, Willie, was shoved into a telephone booth in the lobby of one of the garment factory buildings on West 35th Street in Manhattan. And two assailants, they stabbed, Willie in the neck 4 times with an ice pick. And the 37-year-old father of 4, he perished from his injuries. And at his son's funeral, Max, their dad, they said he raised his fist and he vowed, he said, "I'm going to organize for Willie and me." However, a week and a day to the day that Willie passed away, Max actually died. And, a lot of people say that he died from a broken heart. The deaths of Men's father, Max, and brother Willie made her even more determined to continue her work. She said, when talking about continuing her work, she said, quote, "If I don't do this, if we let these bastards win, then my father's whole life is wasted. My brother's whole life is wasted. And my life is wasted." End quote. Men continued to have, run-ins with Russell Buffalino and his goons. It's said that at one time, when she was coming into town to organize, they were all standing outside, and they kind of, him and his goons, they surrounded the women the organizers, you know, in an attempt to intimidate them, of course. And, you know, sometimes they did, you know, put hands on these ladies. But, you know, on this particular day, she said, when they get over here, we're just going to all start screaming. And so when they approached them, everybody just started screaming to the top of their lungs. And several neighbors and community members, they started opening their doors and windows, and they watched. And so, you know, the mafia, the guys, they just kind of stood around, you know, because they saw everybody looking at them. And men, you know, she confronted them and she said, go ahead and do it. She said, what do y'all think y'all gonna do? This is our town, not yours. Whatever you think you're gonna do, there's gonna be witnesses. And she was right, because, you know, eventually they just slinked away. So, like, this is the type of person that Mian was. Like, Mian wasn't no motherfucking punk. Like, she was there to let you know, like, this is what I do. Like, I'm gonna be here. Like, basically, like, whose house? Like, our fucking house, right? Mian wasn't just successful among the workers. Like, she was actually pretty popular among the factory owners. And a lot of people said that it's because she took a very pragmatic approach. Like, she actually joined, you know, she was part of her upbringing was that you never break bread with management, you never break bread with the company. And when Mian came to town, you know, several business organizations, they would invite her out to dinner because they wanted to kind of like explain, you know, their point and where they were coming from. And so Mian accepted, you know, one of the business dinners, and she said she was really, really nervous because she was like, oh Lord, this is gonna get back to my bosses in New York that I'm out here fraternizing with the enemy. But she said she actually heard them out, and it actually made her a better organizer. And she was actually pretty fair, you know, with the factory owners as you know, with getting like successful contracts. And she even got, you know, flack from she got flack from the headquarters because they didn't think that she was setting her sights high enough during negotiations. And, you know, she told them plenty of times, like she said, there was a lot of times where she had to let them know, look, this is not New York. We cannot ask for the same things that you ask for. Like, we have to be fair. Men saw unions as a way to empower workers. And, you know, part of that empowerment is getting a contract, like actually getting the damn contract, getting the signatures on the paper. And men saw unions as a way to, you know, basically, you know, to bring everybody together. So she says that if you don't have a labor union, you're really being denied your democratic rights. Men, they had great, you know, member involvement in the union. A lot of the members, they took on leadership roles. They joined school boards. They ran for school boards. They participated in local politics. The regional district, they had a newsletter and a radio program that was written by Bill, and it was known for its candor and humor. And not only did union members listen to it, like, you know, the community would listen to it. They had a community chorus that would go around during Christmas time and holidays and sing songs. And this was really, really popular. They even had a mobile healthcare unit that would go from town to the rural areas of the workers so that they could have access to healthcare. So, I mean, it was a very holistic, you know, union that men had created. In 1963, Mian was transferred to Manhattan to work for the Garment Workers Union label department. And in this department, you know, it was kind of like the advertising part. And they, you know, came up with the slogan, "Look for the union label." And it was a very, very successful campaign. But Mian and Bill, you know, they really missed Pittstown because they were there. She was there for over 20 years, you know, working. And in 1972, Mian and Bill moved back to Pennsylvania shortly before Hurricane Agnes destroyed thousands of the homes there. So after the hurricane, you know, Mian was instrumental in founding the Flood Victims Action Council, which, you know, pushed for disaster relief. She made national headlines when she actually confronted George Romney, yes, Mitt's daddy, who at the time was serving as the U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. So he was at a news conference and men confronted him, and she shoved a photo of flood destruction in his face. And she said, "You don't give a damn whether we live or die." Still gangster. Like, even when she wasn't doing union shit, she was still out there. Min is also credited with being one of the founding members of the National Organization of Women. She eventually parted ways with them because, she says that, hey, we can have organizations that uplift one part of the community without bashing another. So you can kind of take that with what you will, like just read into that what you will. Under her leadership, the union in Pittstown, or where the region where Min worked, Min took the union shops from 6 organized shops to 168. And the membership went from 650 members to over 11,000. Min died on December 8th, 1992. She was 83 years old. And that, Troublemakers, is the story of Min Matheson. Usually this is the part of the show where I give my flowers. So this is kind of like a way of giving my flowers. I would like to thank this week friend of the show, Harold Phillips, for this recommendation. He is the one that recommended that I look into Min's life, and he felt like she would be a great, subject for a highlight, and he was absolutely right. Harold Phillips is, a fellow labor podcaster. He has a show I believe it's Working for a Living, where he talks about, working conditions out in the Portland area. He is a SAG-AFTRA member and just an all-around good guy. He's also one of the heads of the Labor Podcast Network, which, Resolve Labor Podcast is a proud member. I also want to thank Harold for bringing me into this labor podcast world and giving me some amazing, opportunities and allowing me to meet some great people that I otherwise never would have, known were even out there had it not been for my, 6 degrees of separation from Harold. So, Harold, these are your flowers, buddy. And keep doing the good work and keep preaching the gospel. And if you would like to to give flowers to someone in your community, someone in your union, because we do not wait till they retire. We do not wait till they are no longer with us to, show our appreciation and tell us how they feel about them. Please write to us. Write to us at resolvedlaborpod@gmail.com. That's resolvedlaborpod@gmail.com. I would be honored to read one of your letters on a future episode. Don't forget to like us, share us, and rate us, as it is very helpful to the show. Thanks again for listening, Troublemakers. As always, peace and solidarity. This week's episode of Resolved Labor Podcast is produced by The Create Place Studio. You can find them on all social media platforms at The Create Place STL. We Won is performed by Joe Jinks and written by John O'Connor. This has been Resolved Labor Podcast. As always, peace and solidarity.
Everybody come and join in the union. Begin. Stand together to overcome soon, and we win.